Okay, this is the Plainfield Planning Commission meeting on Monday, June 2nd, 2025. And we'll call the meeting to order. And the first order of business will be approval of the minutes. And we'll have a motion
Yeah, I'll make a motion
and a
for those.
second.
Second.
Okay, any discussion of the minutes? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. The first item on the agenda is the review of the neighborhood development area application that was submitted today. And I mailed you all a copy of the complete application. You don't need to wade right through it, but basically, just short history for the people on Zoom and for David. The town was able to get a grant from the central, from I guess it was state development, that would pay the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission to provide staff assistance so the town could apply for a neighborhood development area designation. And I'll discuss a little bit about the benefits of that in a minute. But basically, we took that grant. We it took it from October till now to get it sent in. And there were oh, Dennis, you want to say something or?
No, I was just adjusting my settings. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. That's life in Zoom, in the Zoom world.
Mm.
So the neighborhood designation area, the application went in. It's going to provide the ability to create housing in the in a designated area with expedited review. Basically, what it does is it allows for Act 250 to not come into certain housing applications because all the criteria are already pre-approved and met in terms of natural resources, which are on the maps. And so those items are sort of pre-selected in this area, and it's where the sewer service is available. So I'm going to share the map of the screen. Oh, let's map 3. I'm going to pick that. I'm going to share it. And can everyone see that map roughly? Okay. If you look at it closely, the shaded area is the area that's within 200 feet of an existing sewer line. The the wastewater ordinance says that if you are within 200 feet of an existing sewer line, you must hook up to it. You don't have the option of creating a septic system, which you really wouldn't want to do anyway, because a septic system will cost you $20,000-$30,000, and hooking up to the sewer is much less expensive. So there was a discrepancy in where some of the projects in town, specifically Goddard and the village expansion project. If you look at the village expansion project, you'll see that the sewer district shading doesn't include the whole property that proposed village expansion is on. And at that point, we were going to have a trouble getting the neighborhood development area approved for the village expansion. So what we did was we got the village expansion. Arian and Sandy already had gone to the wastewater commission and said, "Can you service? What will you serve the property?" And they said yes, but they didn't record it specifically in the minutes. So they had a special meeting late last week that just clarified the minutes, and those minutes are included in the application, saying when we discussed servicing the East Village expansion project, the intent was to service the entire property, even though it's technically out of the required sewer service area. So that dotted line you'll see on the map extends over to the non-sewer capacity buffer zone. in the East Village project. So the East Village expansion project is now included in the neighborhood development area. Same is true with Goddard. Um, the Regional Planning Commission drew the NDA line around the existing sewer lines. That sewer line that extends down 214 is the one that goes to the library in Northwood, because all of Goddard, the original Goddard property, is on town wastewater lines and water lines. So that area there is on there. There was a lot of back and forth about when we designed, just the regional planner and I and Sandy tried to say what the boundary is. We thought if a property had access to sewer, then the entire property would too. But the Department of Housing and Community Development didn't look at it that way, because Plainfield has a unique zoning feature that says in the village district, if you're on town sewer, you can be higher density. At the moment, with the recently passed zoning, we can be down to a tenth of an acre with conditional use and fifth of an acre with permitted use. But we also have in the village district, if you're not on village sewer, you can be 2 acres. So the village district has essentially two separate zoning, two different density requirements based on sewage capacity. Therefore, the state determined that you couldn't have a neighborhood development area that wasn't outside the existing sewer ordinance defined line. In other words, that 200-foot buffer. Following me, it's a little complicated. But basically, if you got a sewer line near you, you have to be on 200 feet in your property. You have to be on the sewer, and you get the higher density of the sewage district density in the village. But if you're not out, if you're outside that boundary, you don't have to hook on. So therefore, the density is less. So it doesn't comply with the neighborhood development area. This took a few weeks of back and forth to get this right. And even now, it's not quite right. But I think the meeting was today or tomorrow with the neighborhood, with the development review, the community development board, who approves these, and they only meet every 3 months. So we couldn't get the application together for the May meeting. They were willing to have a meeting in June just for Plainfield, so we could get this done, because they knew we had these two projects in town. We had the Goddard issue with the property being converted to private use. We had the expansion project that needed to move forward with some degree of certainty as to its permitting capability. If either of these two projects had to go through Act 250, they would add $100,000 to the cost, and things wouldn't happen at a very good speed. So that neighborhood development and the designation is only for housing. If you were to build if you were to propose an Amazon distribution center in the village in the village and neighborhood development area, you will have to comply with Act 250. It's only a way to expedite the housing development in these places that you've already scoped out all the other Act 250 criteria.
What about non-housing stuff at Goddard? How will that relate?
Well, that we'll get to that. Yeah, that's coming up. Hopefully Karen will show up, but the so that's where we are with the neighborhood development area. The application went in. There was some back and forth on where that boundary should be. Hopefully it gets approved. If they don't, I'll be really disappointed. But I think they will approve it. That's also the reason we did that sidewalk policy. The part of the some of the components we put in the zoning revision were directly related to meeting the requirements of the neighborhood development area. They wanted connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, which is why we had the sidewalk policy, which is why we have a plan to complete more sidewalks in the village over time as money becomes available. So if it gets approved, I'll let you know. If it doesn't get approved, I'll let you know. But the, the what's funny is this development area designation and our village designation, because we have a village center designation. Now, hopefully we have a neighborhood designation. These are all going to be basically described statewide by a new regional land use plan. Paula Emery was going to try to be here, but she couldn't make it. So the regional land use plan is going to try to basically figure out where these places are in the state, but it's going to be done by regional plans. And the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission is like October of next year. So they are essentially going to have a neighborhood development area in each town, in those areas where they determine that the natural resources are not in danger and the capacity of the town to have higher density meets those requirements. So I'm going to share another page because I ended up going to this. Let me get another page up. And this is just a summary of where we are. Every town is going to have a center, and we have our center, and then every town is going to have a neighborhood, and we will have our neighborhood. And the reason you want to do the work ahead of time is because when you get the statewide designations, if you haven't had a designation before, you're just what's called a beginner center or a beginner neighborhood. But if you've already had it in place, you step up a layer to an intermediate center or an intermediate neighborhood where you get more benefits. So a legacy villages would step and a legacy downtown or we're a legacy village, not a new town center. We would step into the intermediate center. And we would get more benefits like infrastructure funding, all these benefits. We have the authority to lower speed limits to 25, exemptions from land gains tax, all these benefits, municipal hordes preservation regulations, assistance. It's a whole bunch of things that by being at that intermediate level, by having had the existing neighborhood development and the existing village center designation, we are allowed more items. I'll send this out and you can look at it in more detail. But that's essentially, you want the designation for what you're going to do now, but you want the designation the same way with the flood hazard zone. If you have it in place, you can move forward in an easier way. So that's basically where we are with that. The whole thing of like these flow charts and designated areas, and you can start to get a little fuzzy-eyed about it. But after a while, it does make a little sense, and the town does benefit from those funding and options, grant options, and you have priority for getting some of those features. So hopefully that's done. We're going to move forward. We do have to at some point, we got to decide how we're going to resolve the conflict between a village zoning district that has two density requirements. There are a couple of complex ways to do that, but I think maybe the simplest way is just shrink the village zoning district to just include the area within the 200-foot buffer of the sewer line, and the rest of it would be rural residential. Because looking at the map, that's pretty much the village. And then outside of it, there's some outlying distances, and those places are not within that must connect line. So
the areas that are outside the sewer that don't have the availability of sewer, it's almost like the zoning requirements are like rural residential, right?
right,
It's like 2.5 acres or 2 acres, whatever it was, and maybe there's 1 or 2 permitted uses difference or something
right.
like
So we when we were drawing the village district, we tried to make it bigger to kind of help it grow, but maybe that's too aspirational. Since it's really the higher density is determined by the sewer capacity and the availability. So it's nothing we need to decide tonight. It's just something to think about as you look at what is the village, what is that now the neighborhood, and then outside of that, a lot of it is like the horse farm across from the health center. That's conserved land. That's part of that property is in the village district, but it's essentially not. So I think that's one way to do it.
going up Berry Hill, when I sent an email before the vote to a number of people, kind of encouraging, or not even encourage anybody to vote a certain way. I just gave a little perspective. One of the feedbacks I got from a couple of people was disappointment of the area going up Berry Hill that was extended, that doesn't have sewer
Right.
capability. Well, maybe it could in the future, it would be a big project, but that would kind of come in where what you're talking about, right? That it could
Yeah.
be, if there was a decision to shrink it to the 200 feet, that some of that area wouldn't be included anymore, probably.
It would, and if they, like I said, we could look at what are the permitted and conditional uses that those properties would lose, and
Right.
that's kind of the issue. So, 10 years ago it was make the village bigger. Now it's really be realistic and make it make it what it, the higher density what it is. But that's a discussion that we'll have to come up with and think about. We have well, I think I'll jump right into let me look at the agenda just so we can pay attention to it a little bit. I'll take this screen down. Oh, did I? Oh, stop sharing. Okay. So, uh, I'll just briefly changing. We talked about the land use maps, and there will be changes. The legislature passed some things Friday having to do with zoning and housing, and some of them had to do with like posting notices. If you're in a small town that doesn't have 3 places to post, you can post in the neighboring town, and it counts. So, Jesse, if you want to go post something over there at Maple Fields, you can. It wouldn't count before they pass this, but there are towns that are so small they don't have 3 places to post, and there are new requirements for meetings and then the housing. I haven't gone through all of it, but there are quite a few changes that are coming up. So one of them is we need to, if there are, this was one of them, if there are state requirements, like for instance the housing, the 4 dwellings per unit is a permitted use everywhere, um, and accessory dwellings are permitted everywhere, and it's not in your zoning. The select board, you don't need to hold, the planning commission doesn't need to hold a hearing, just the select board needs to hold a hearing. So that expedites the amendment process for those items that are already required by the state. Just a little aside because things are changing. So Karen sent me an email the other day about the um, Goddard College is trying to get permits for its many uses that it has on its campus. And remember, the Liam Murphy was here, and he explained that way of having a sort of a global zoning permit for the entire campus based on previous use of the college, the same way they did it in Poultney for Green Mountain College, where the college campus had its own zoning district and had its own ability to create these global permits for previous use that would instead of being conditional use for like the cafeteria, it would be permitted because it was at the college. And we thought, oh, that was a good idea. We'll work on that. Well, they've already sort of Liam has helped them apply a zoning permit that essentially does the same thing, and they're asking for sort of a global uh, 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 permit. And Karen basically said, well, that we don't want to do that because we've never done it. And so they submitted the permit with a site plan that didn't show the boundaries, the building dimensions, and the setbacks from the road. So she asked for that to be complete. We have that. The listers have that. I sent it to Karen. I can send it to you. But basically, they need to reapply technically for because their application was incomplete. That's where we are now. And she also said she didn't want to do a global permit. What she wanted to do, she has a list of every building at Goddard. And they have a list of every use of it, which ones are residential, which ones are commercial. Um, Karen's proposal is to um, have a have a use, a defined use for each of those buildings. And normally, if a building's in town and it's an office, it doesn't matter who's in the office. Its use is an office, and the tenant can change from one office holder to another, or essentially from one restaurant owner to another, assuming the hours are the same. So Karen is proposing that each use at Goddard, whether it's a daycare center or an office building or a residence or a whatever, be listed on this permit as the use, and as that use would change, they would have to update the permit. Or she could explain it better, but basically that's the rather than just say whatever happened before we can keep going on with. She wants to have everything defined because some of the buildings that were listed on the sheet as residences are now commercial, so it's not accurate. So the town's obligation is wanting to know what the uses are individually and if they change, and then the Goddard's interest is to try to keep the permit process as simple as possible. And I think we can do those things with what Karen's doing, but rather than to have one permit, have multiple uses listed. So one of the uses that there are actually two residential care homes being proposed at Goddard by two separate entities. And the previous zoning, actually the zoning that we passed and needs to be amended, listed residential care homes. Such homes shall be considered by right to constitute a permitted single-family use of property. So you can have a residential care home, but the previous zoning from 2011, except that no such home shall be within 1,000 feet of another. And the amendment process was interrupted by the revote process had that taken out. I think that got put in. David, do you remember when up on East Hill, the state corrections department snuck in that little halfway house and didn't tell anybody for like a year, and they had all these ex-cons like running around East Hill, and they never told anybody? But anyway, I, I, yeah, I think that's how that got in there. Anyway, it shouldn't be in there. We're taking it out. But until that's taken out, but one you can only have one residential care home at Goddard unless they can separate them by 1,000 feet, and I'm not sure they can. So that leads us to where we are with the zoning amendments. And we had our hearing on the zoning amendments. We sent them to the select board. They were going to hold their hearing on the zoning amendments. And then the zoning revote petition got filed with the town. And at that point, everything stopped, came to a screeching halt. So now that that's passed, I'm going to write the select board and ask them to, they, they have, they have to hold their hearing within 150 days of our hearing. So they could put it off for another month. But the sooner they can have the hearing, they can approve those amendments at the hearing. And that will enable Goddard to at least have those two residential care homes. And that, so we want to try to put a little bit of, just nudge the select board to move that up on their calendar. So there we are with all that. And I think Karen's on the right track with what she wants to do with the Goddard permit. It just makes it a little harder for them. But hopefully it accomplishes, what we need to do and what'll help them progress.
Well, the permit, what they've applied for already, would all of the things that they're applying for be permitted uses? If they separate them out, are there ones that would have to be conditional use, or
Yeah,
are they
yes. Yeah, they would. In fact, I think any of the stuff in the historic building, the zoning calls for a DRB review. So, but that can be expedited too. I think. Because they're just going to say we're not going to change the building. We're just going to do what has been going on in it for a while, or change the use, but no, wholesale changes. So I don't think that'll be an issue. But there are certain things that would need DRB review, and they could do that all in one meeting. I'm thinking, unless it was unless they did something really that was different from what they had been going on in the past. So once we get the first set of amendments passed, the second set of amendments we had, there is some. I will send out the subdivision suggestions where I think we talked about this once before, where our subdivision hearing schedule is like it's 3 or 4 months, where other towns can do it in 6 to 8 weeks. It's just there's a second, there's a preliminary, there's a on major subdivisions, there's a preliminary plat review, a hearing, and then a final hearing. Whereas in most towns, whereas we have two sets of hearings on a major subdivision. So maybe if you read through the subdivision regulations, maybe just have all the subdivision regulations and PUDs go through what we call a minor subdivision. Just making the process a little quicker and a little easier to handle for the applicant and for the DRB. So that's something we should discuss, maybe at the next meeting. I'll resend out the information and the tables and stuff, because we do want to have another set of amendments, because we do want to make some other changes. I know Karen had some. And then we have, back to the last item on the agenda, is back to tiny homes and RVs. And, do we need to have anything specific on that as an amendment to our adopted zoning? And I think we're okay, but like we discussed last time, we don't have anything specific about mobile home parks, and there are those state requirements about that you can't discriminate against them. They just need to meet certain landlord tenant requirements. And I think maybe Karen, we need to, because that's something the DRB needs to, they will have to manage that application.
I think it makes sense for us to define, if, within some time frame, I don't know how quickly, but it seems to me there's like 3 different classes of tiny homes that we could look at. And that maybe it would be smart to have them uh, uh, in the zoning regulations. There's tiny homes on a foundation, tiny homes on a trailer, there's tiny homes that are hooked up to sewer, tiny homes that aren't hooked up to sewer. And that we should just say, an example would be a tiny home that's on a trailer is regulated the same way as a mobile home. That we would want to say it rather than have it be something that would have to get discussed each time.
Right. It might be we just need to put those in the definitions.
Right.
Hopefully other towns have worked this through and we can take their experience.
If they have, I could only find one online, which isn't perfect. I could only find one town that had published their tiny home rules, regulations, whatever, definitions, and they were different. They were like basically trying to not have tiny homes. So it was Wyndham, was some town in southern Vermont, probably a bigger town, but it was like they basically said no home smaller than 675 square feet, and which I'm not saying we should do anything like that, but I couldn't find towns, any municipal stuff, but that's imperfect, just looking online. So
Right. Well, the other thing is, is there anything in this new act that got recently passed and will be signed? I think it should be signed this week, or it already has. Maybe that has some information in it. Things are changing pretty significantly in a lot of ways. So, and all to promote construction of more housing. I mean, there's
I'm also conversation sometime about tiny homes and affordability and how you look at. I have a fear that tiny homes are going to become the answer to affordability, and I think that's an important thing to talk about. It could be an answer, but I don't think it should be the answer, because tiny homes are restrictive in terms of, you're not going to get too many families with kids, et cetera, in a 400 square foot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the affordability is townhouses and cluster, one building with multiple units because that's efficient construction.
Yeah, we used to talk about starter houses, which would be akin to a tiny home, except they would be designed to be a house that was easy to expand, and that you could look forward to it being a family home. Most tiny homes that I've seen don't lend themselves to that, but that's a whole nother thing.
Right. And it could be that, we don't want to, some towns, they get into design criteria, and we just want to make sure that it's safe and it's the zoning and use are pretty specific versus the details. But we do want to the one mistake is to try to zone things big enough so they're unaffordable, which I think we're kind of.
I'm not sure I think the thing that I am interested in exploring is if we give density bonuses, if the town gives density bonuses for affordable housing, is there a way we can look at it so that that does not become, so the tiny housing doesn't become the only way that that happens? Because I could see that happening pretty easily. Somebody's looking for a density bonus, and they use tiny houses to meet the affordability standards to get the density bonuses. And I'm not sure that that would be a good thing to have happen on a regular basis.
Right, because
but
yeah, your housing stock would be diminished because it would be all, very small, non-family oriented houses.
right.
Okay.
So, subject for discussion.
Yeah, I think so, and a little more research for sure. But um, do take a look at the subdivision and think about how to expedite that. I'll resend out that information tomorrow sometime. That would be that, and I'll send the information. I'll nudge the select board to get that hearing, and hopefully we get that done, because there are a couple of things in there we want to get. Well, the 10 acre conditional use is in there. You know, that's part of the package. So the goal was to have those amendments adopted as soon as possible. It just, the realm of possibility in this business is really hard to figure sometimes.
Yeah.
Did we have 3 people on the Zoom meeting, and if anyone has a question or comment, we'd love to hear them.
Yes, I'll wait my turn, but I have a couple of questions if
Sure.
I can get a chance here. Let me, I hate talking without an image, so I'm gonna push to get my image here. Right, try not to be a dark screen when I'm addressing you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. No, I sincerely appreciate that. I've been following this, I think, at some of your meetings and also the select board, and I'm sort of a Goddard College alumnus from long standing. And in listening to some of the things, when will the new zoning that allows for more permitted uses for the Goddard campus, when do you anticipate that will take effect? Or what is the target goal for taking that, having that take effect? And before that takes effect, what kind of projects can ExecuSuites and Michael undertake in prior to the new zoning? In other words, what kind of projects can they undertake under the existing zoning?
Well, the new zoning is in place.
Okay.
It passed town meeting. There was a petition to rescind it. The vote was May 20th. That vote was essentially the same, almost the same number of people voting for as against as the town meeting. So it is in effect now. So Goddard College campus is in the village district, and it has all the permitted uses that the village district has. Hopefully they will be in the neighborhood development area, which will expedite some housing options that he may be looking at. But the one thing we were discussing with the permit is how to have a permitting process where they don't need to permit every single thing every time, and try to make that administratively effective. So they've applied for that global permit, and they need to update the site plan review to give it more information. And I think most of those things will happen, other than the 2 residential care homes. They can only have one till that 1,000-foot buffer goes into effect. Now, an interesting little sideline of the way zoning works is that the minute the select board warns their hearing on the amendments, those amendments, the zoning administrator has to review any permit under those new amendments. So if the select board had their hearing, they need to warn it 15 days, but it could be the 17th or 18th of June. The minute they warn the hearing, they become effective. So that's so it could happen pretty quick for the residential care home. The other uses, they're already in effect. They've been in effect since town meeting day in March.
So some of the uses that they're proposing, I know they're proposing like lodging for special events where like I know some people that were trying to organize a reunion. So obviously that would involve special events, use of the hay barn, dormitory lodging. So something like that, for that to proceed, they would come before you, come before the Development Review Board and say that's a conditional use. We'd like to have the legal possibility of holding events where people pay lodging to stay overnight and use our campus. So that would be a conditional use, and that would be something that they would say be preparing to request a permit for.
Yeah, I think so. I think they want to try to get it as a permitted use because it was already existing, but the town hasn't done that before. So I think the zoning administrator and the DRB would be comfortable doing things the way they have always done them traditionally. It might be a little slower, but it's certainly possible. These are just sort of procedural details. The enablement is in place.
So then ultimately on the Development Review Board, maybe a month from now or 2 weeks from now or 2 months
Yeah.
from now, there would be an application that the Development Review Board would consider. They'd have a meeting announcement, they'd have a public hearing and take
Yeah.
comments and things like
Yeah.
that. Okay.
It
So that
takes a
actually
little
is in place.
Yes, they could do that. What the development review order will, for an event facility would just want to know hours of operation. Nothing past so many, midnight or whatever. Just like they would for restaurants. When a conditional use for a restaurant is define the hours of operation and things like that. So it's nothing really too arduous. It's just defining what's going to happen, the boundaries.
And then it sounds like also the Act 250, Act 250, that the zoning's been tailored to sort of remove Act 250 review, or is that something that still might happen? Or
Well, that's the neighborhood development area designation. The application went in today, went in today. It'll be reviewed this week. Once that's granted, the Act 250 Act 250 review process for housing projects only in the designated area won't have to file an Act 250 permit.
so, but
That's a big.
But the transfer of the property and some of the uses that are being proposed, that's sort of outside of the Act 250 already.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because he's not the uses are still the same. And he's not building anything. If he were to propose, putting in lots of housing or something without the neighborhood development area, then he would have to go through Act 250. Then it would be a more involved process.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful, because I have some other alumni friends that I keep in touch with, and they were sort of saying like, what's happening, what's the future, what kind of buildings are going to go there. And I said, well, I try to attend the meetings to learn that, so now I can report back, sort of what's happening.
Sort of, but I tell you, even if you talk to Sabrina or Mike, you still don't know what's happened. Pretty much and everything's sort of up for discussion. And certainly a lot of small businesses have made he's rented some spaces. Things are happening there, and we just need to catch up from a zoning perspective with the town. And I think those things will get worked out.
But all the things that they anticipate doing and any changes that they anticipate making, if it's not a permitted use, it will come before the DRB, and there'll be sort of public access to learn what it is. For example, eventually the revised site plan and things like that will show up as public documents.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. That's been most informative and answered a lot of questions.
Okay. Well, it's funny. You get some answered, but every time you answer a few, you got a few more questions. So, it's yet to be solved how we're going to work that permitting process out. But I'm sure we will do it to everybody's advantage. I'm optimistic on that one.
Right. Well, I know everybody that I've talked to as a Goddard alumni is sort of really pulling and rooting for Plainfield to sort of rise up from the floods and for Goddard to sort of be an accessible place again. So this sounds all good.
Yeah. It's moving along pretty well.
Thank you.
That's for sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Well, that's all I had for the meeting. Is to bring everybody up to date on the neighborhood development area application. Some of the reviews of the zoning changes, and I'll try to get some more information on what that act passing will really do. So Jesse can post over at Maple Fields if you want. And then I will send out the subdivision. We want to think about the subdivision. I'm not sure we want to think about the shrinking of the village district down to the 200-foot buffer of the existing sewer lines. Something maybe there's a better way to do it, but if you look at the map of the properties of what would not be in the village anymore, it's not, it's more rural as rural residential, as David said. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We'll have a motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Okay.
On that motion, Will,
Yeah,
we don't vote on the motion to adjourn.
you don't. You just have to have a motion to adjourn. I'm trying to be a little more like, a little more straight ahead now that we're recording.
To adjourn.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.
Okay. Night.